bagaimana shock dari COVID ini betul-betul memukul dan kemampuan kita untuk mengcounternya tidak bisa menetralisir cukup besar.
Memprioritaskan kesehatan bukan berarti mengorbankan ekonomi. Sekali lagi, kita harus mencari keseimbangan yang pas.
Things are looking up. Your business is growing. So what's your next step? A bigger office? A new supplier? Your next big contract overseas? Your business has growing needs. You'll need more support, more flexibility, more resources, and a bank that makes it their business to help expand your business. Welcome to Business Banking with HSBC. All our experience and expertise brought right to you so that you and your business can take the next step. You'll have support from a dedicated relationship manager and access to our global network of experts. The flexibility to manage your finances across multiple devices. International accounts all on one platform. And much more. So choose Business Banking with HSBC and take your next step.
Good morning from here in Jakarta. Hello and welcome to the 7th Annual Indonesia Economic Forum. We had a lively opening day yesterday where global and Indonesian experts covered a broad range of macroeconomic issues pertaining to the possible shape of a post-COVID world. The topics range from reshaping the economy for the next normal to factors reshaping the global economy and to the future of work. The one key takeaway from yesterday's sessions was that the world has changed, and individuals, companies, and indeed nations that can adapt quickest to the new reality are the ones that will succeed. The pre-COVID world is now history. There is no going back. But what lies ahead is incredibly exciting and I think full of wonderful opportunities. Today we are continuing where we left off yesterday with some great speakers from across the world who will be providing insights and ideas on more specific issues such as emerging trends in global trade, revitalizing manufacturing, especially the textile sector here in Indonesia, and how we can move to more sustainable finance of our key infrastructure projects. I am proud to say that for the first time, the Indonesia Economic Forum is a truly global event, broadcasting out of Jakarta, but reaching most major regions in the world. Yesterday, we had about 1,000 people logging in. We are now fully virtual, and really, this is the new reality. Before we get started, I would like to thank all our partners, HSBC Indonesia, Sembcorp Development, Jababeka Group, Victoria State Government, Int'l Corporation, and Asia Pacific Fibers. Without your support, this forum would not have been possible. I would also like to thank all our content partners, those who have helped us to promote our forum to their members, including KADIN and Ibu Shinta's help, the Singapore Business Federation and Global Connect, Castle Asia, the Singapore Chamber of Commerce Indonesia, AmCham Indonesia, the Indonesia-Australia Business Council, Indiana University ASEAN Gateway, the Indiana University Indonesian Alumni, Orbit Future Academy, Kairos, Cognito, Cultus, and Synthesis Indonesia. As you can see, our broad and multiple range of partners indicates that the Indonesia Economic Forum is indeed a multi-stakeholder platform. To start off today, we have a great lineup of speakers on the topic of emerging trends in global trade. I now invite Dr. Muhammad Hadianto, Deputy Director of Multilateral Cooperation on Economics, Finance, and International Financial Institutions at the Coordinating Ministry for Economic Affairs, who will be your host. Dr. Hadianto, the stage is yours.
All of you signing in from Jakarta, and good afternoon, good evening, signing in from the other part of the world. I am very humbled and delighted today to chair our first session this morning, which will discuss the future trends of global trade. This is indeed a very timely topic, and of course, we are all looking forward to hear the insights shared by our panels. And by the way, this session is the only session is the only session that has an all-female panelist. So kudos to IF and Pak Shoaib. Now, before we go to the panels, I would like to invite His Excellency Vice Minister of Trade, Dr. Jerry Sambuaga, to present key remarks. Dr. Jerry, if you are ready, the Zoom is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Yan. Terima kasih atas sambutannya dan penyampaiannya. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan, salam sehat dan salam semangat. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, the honorable ones, founder of Indonesia Economic Forum, Pak Shoaib, how are you, Pak? Hope you're doing well. All the panelists, Ibu Lili Yan-ing, Lead Advisor, Economic Research Institute for ASEAN, Ibu Shinta Kamdani, Vice Chairperson of Indonesian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Professor Sarah Danzman, Assistant Professor of International Studies, Hamilton Lugar School of International Studies, Indiana University, and of course, our great moderator, Dr. Muhammad Hadianto, biasa saya panggil Mas Yan. And last but not least, a very good morning to all participants. Thank you, Indonesia Economic Forum, for having me in this webinar. The emerging trends in global trade is a really interesting topic to discuss, and I believe with the experts joining us today, we'll make the discussion even more exciting. Ladies and gentlemen, before the COVID-19 outbreaks, the world actually has witnessed massive changes in many countries and business engaged economically. For instance, the emerging industry 4.0, cloud computing, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and robotics are disruption in business industries. On the other hand, there is also a loss of confidence in the WTO and multilateral trading system, which affected to the increasing trend in approach in bilateral and regional trade deals, as well as unilateral actions that often in punitive sense. Trade war between two major economies with strong value chain also severely creating domino effects around the globe and leading to the emergence of beggar-tie neighbor policy that worsens the economic problems in other countries. Obviously, COVID-19 has been causing major effect in global trade. At least 3 global shifts accelerated by the pandemic, namely, first, an accelerated shift from market to state, meaning more government interventions. Second, national unilateralism, governments acting on their own, often against each other, at the expense of global cooperation. And third, more contested and unstable geopolitics centered on US-China rivalry and increasingly US-EU and US-Russia, and all competing for global influence. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to adapt with the new normal, the so-called new normal, there should be adjustment taking place. First, the efficiency problem, or should I say security over efficiency issues, security of supplies like food, medicine, electronic parts, and components. And also trade is being restored, not rejected, reducing heavy reliance on single source of supply, not protectionism, just the necessity of being sovereign and independent from an industrial point of view. Third, towards shorter supply chains, fortifying economic relationship closer to home rather than across oceans. For East Asian countries, RCEP agreement may be more realistic than relations across the Pacific, such as CPTPP or cross-Atlantic between US and EU. Next is toward dual circulation, led by China, combining international circulation and international circulation, particularly focusing on export and domestic consumption. And next is about business adjust to the new reality, putting people and planet, transparency, proximity, and collaboration. The key of Indonesia is to strike the right balance among the sources of growth. Ladies and gentlemen, recently, Indonesia, together with ASEAN members and other FTA partners, signed the RCEP deal. It was signed on 15 November 2020, and it's showing a very significant message of how a very large regional bloc is present today, nowadays, with the region of Southeast Asia. Even though restoring confidence in the WTO and multilateral trading system will take time, we believe that RCEP has become a good signal for the world that multilateral trading system remain essential. The comprehensive nature of the agreement, as well as the principle of semester start differentiated timetable, also provide a good example on how countries who are willing to support each other may address the issue of development under a trade agreement. ASEAN is at the center of all this, so it is important for ASEAN to take this journey in the context of realizing the ASEAN Economic Community 2025 and beyond. Regarding RCEP, there will be challenges to implement all the commitments fully and faithfully. However, RCEP participating countries should help each other to make sure that the agreement can enter into force soon and everybody lives with their commitments. Indonesia also have identified several strategic approaches to mitigate the potential challenges. Encourage the transformation of export structure from commodity-based to value-added processed products, increase market intelligence and promotion for Indonesian products, develop MSMEs and incorporate them into a digital economy, improve the quality of domestic products so that they are able to compete, and improve the utilization of existing trade agreements through intensive socialization. Here is the list of the concluded and ongoing negotiation. We are currently exploring trade deals with non-traditional markets, namely, particularly African countries. We also put effort to conclude Indonesian-European-Indonesia SEPA and Indonesia-Korea SEPA. There are some concluded negotiations under ratification process, namely Indonesian EFTA SEPA, ASEAN Agreement on E-commerce, and the other agreements. Indonesia, as the biggest economy in Southeast Asia, has a powerful influence in the global economy. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, I wish you a very fruitful discussion through this webinar, and I look forward to hear the result of our exchange of knowledge today. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice Minister. Very good remarks indeed. I understand that you have a busy schedule ahead of you, but I wonder if you could spend, a little bit more time to which will coming actually from me, and I'm sure this question is also in the head of many of participants here today. So you've mentioned about RCEP, Mr. Vice Minister. I wonder if you could explore what's the actual significance of RCEP for Indonesia, and if any, what are the measures that Indonesia need to adjust or to upscale in order to, borrowing your words, fully realize the commitment. Vice Minister.
Yeah, thank you, Mas Ian. First of all, I'll have to say that RCEP is the biggest or the second largest trading bloc after WTO, and it is safe to say that as a regional bloc, one of the most significant regional blocs in the world, RCEP has a very vital role in exploring the market and the access within the ASEAN, particularly in Southeast Asia. And as we know that other regional blocs such as EU and maybe other like African Union and so on, they are having different characteristics compared to ASEAN. ASEAN has a value of ASEAN way, so to say. I think most of you know that ASEAN is quite special in this, in its characteristic, and we call it ASEAN way. And ASEAN way believes in peace, cooperation, and also openness, as well as the commitment to have a very healthy and free trade within the region. And as we know that the political stability and the trade volume within the ASEAN could be expanded and could be collaborated not only within the ASEAN member states, but also non-ASEAN member states. For example, for instance, in the RCEP deal, there were 5 non-ASEAN member states, particularly New Zealand, Australia, South Korea, Japan, and People's Republic of China. They were eager to sign this deal, and then it's really showing that ASEAN is very appealing and exciting for non-ASEAN markets. And it is safe to say that the market within Southeast Asia is ASEAN, and it is RCEP that, together with the other deals, have a very significant role in contributing this. And also, we can identify that the connectivity within ASEAN is very important. And then other countries, such as the United States and probably Russia and some European countries, are actually eager to have some sort of involvement and participation within the ASEAN market. So it is not only showing that the non-5 members are quite enthusiastic, but also the other nations, other countries far from this region. And then we can say that in the future, ASEAN can serve as an example of how regional blocs can contribute to economic growth, economic stability, and also the volume of trading. And technically, we can say that in ASEAN, particularly the 10 member states, you can say that they are having this similar conditions, politically, economically, and also resources. Right? And I have to say that Indonesia is the largest country in ASEAN. And also, I can say that Indonesia has performed a very democratic political system in the past 20 years, for example. And then it is actually attracting other investors and other countries to invest within ASEAN because the unique characteristic that ASEAN and Indonesia have. So that's why this deal is very important. And also, seeing from the amount of population, the RCEP countries represent about 29.6% of the world population, 30.2% of the world's GDP, 27.4% of the world trade, and 29.8% of world FDI. And from the data that I received, the statistic of Indonesia's export to RCEP countries has shown positive trend of 7.35% over the past 5 years. And in 2019, Indonesia's total non-oil and gas export to RCEP region represent 56.51% of Indonesia's total export to the world, which is $84.4 billion. So it is actually showing to the rest of the world the importance of open and rule-based trading system that RCEP, particularly Indonesia, is attached to. And I guess this is the moment of how multilateralism, particularly regional relations, regional blocks, and also I can say that compared to other regions in the world, Southeast Asia is very attractive. I think that's all I can say about RCEP right now. We can always have the details on the slides and so on. I can share with you maybe later on, but generally, principally, I will have to say that RCEP is talking about size, volume, and also the stability and unique special characteristics that other nations, other countries might not have. Thank you, Mas Ian.
Thank you very much for that elaboration, Vice Minister. I'm sure there are a lot of other interesting topics to discuss, and I'm sure we can do that in another time. Now, Vice Minister, if you have other engagement to do, I can release you from this morning's event. So thank you very much again for gracing this event with your remarks, and have a pleasant day, Mr. Vice Minister.
Thank you so much, Mas Ian, and other participants and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sorry I have to leave right now. I hope this seminar or this event could produce positive outcomes towards our day and our productive day. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, participants, distinguished guests, let me now turn into our panels. Before that, allow me to introduce the members of the distinguished panels this morning. First is Dr. Lili Yan is currently a senior advisor at AREA, and previously she was the lead advisor to the Minister of Trade. Very good morning to you, Dr. Lili.
Very good morning, Pak Ian.
And the second one is Ibu Shinta Kamdani. She is a prolific son of Indonesia's businesses, and she ensures that the voices of Indonesia's business is heard by the government. A very good morning to you, Ibu Shinta.
Good morning, Pak Ian.
And last but not least is Professor Sarah Danzman, who is joining us from Indiana. She is assistant professor at the University of Indiana. And I'm very sorry for keeping you up late, Professor Danzman. So it's a very good evening to you, Sarah.
And a very good morning to you.
Very good. Now, I would like to, before we move on into the discussion sessions, I would like to invite Professor Danzman to sort of provide, more contextual perspective on the international political economy and a global perspective on what is going on with the international trade situations today. So, Sarah, the Zoom is yours.
Well, thank you very much. I want to start today by thanking the forum organizers, Shoab Kagda, Sachin Gopalan, our panel moderator, Dr. Hadianto, and the entire IEF team that has brought us such a well-run virtual event. I've been asked to provide a scholarly perspective on the global trends, challenges, and opportunities for international political and economic relations that we are likely to face in the coming years, and I'm very honored to do so today. You will see that my remarks actually dovetail quite nicely with those that the Vice Minister just presented. In my mind, the COVID-19 pandemic will be seen as an important inflection point in the trajectory of global economic governance. The pandemic has made explicit the latent fragilities in our increasingly complex and often opaque global value chains. And this has come at a time in which the global public discourse around the international economy has substantially shifted from neoliberal triumphalism to one that emphasizes the societal and national security costs of global exchange. It is tempting to view this anti-globalist turn as but a momentary aberration and to construe the election of Joe Biden to the US presidency as a return to normalcy and business as usual. But such an interpretation would be an incorrect read of the political dynamics that have transformed our current global political economy. In my estimation, the coming years will be decisive in determining what kind of international economic system we will collectively have for decades to come. And while the outcome is not preordained, we can look to empirical trends, the lessons of history, and an understanding of power dynamics in the global political system to identify key problems that our political, business, and civil society leaders will grapple with as we shift from an Atlantic century to a Pacific century. And to me, the central question is how we will govern trade and investment in the coming decades. Will we recommit to a rules-based order that seeks to limit the ability of governments to use their economic power coercively for broader geostrategic gain? Or will we devolve to a realpolitik where might makes right and regional hegemons control the regulatory terms of trade in economic neighborhoods? So to better situate these geopolitical and geoeconomic stakes, I want to develop three main points. First, that COVID-19 has exposed previously discounted vulnerabilities in the way the global economy works, and that the politically and commercially driven responses to these fragilities are likely to persist for a long time. Second, that these vulnerabilities have been interpreted within the context of a global political economy that has largely shifted from viewing global integration as a positive sum enterprise to instead emphasizing the security and economic risks of interdependence. And finally, that we should expect the politics of economic globalization and governance to continue to be contentious for the foreseeable future. By now, it is clear to all of us that COVID has substantially affected global trade. The only questions remaining are how long will recovery take and what will it look like? Now, I do have slides, but I don't see them on my screen. Are they available for everyone? Wonderful. Okay, so if we can move to the next slide, please. These slides show the extent of the immediate impact of COVID on global trade. The figure on the left shows trade volume on a quarterly basis from 2012 until the second quarter of this year. We see that trade plummeted globally starting in the first quarter of this year. The blue and orange lines are North America and Europe. The decline in trade in these regions is especially deep. In contrast, Asia experienced a much shallower dip and is likely going to recover faster than global trade overall. This is especially true after the signing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. The figure on the right shows total global merchandise trade volume on a quarterly basis from 2011 and forecasted through the third quarter of next year. The green dotted line is the trend line based on data from 2011 to 2018. The gray line through quarter 3 of this year is real trade data, and the data onward projects both an optimistic and a pessimistic scenario, with the gray line basically being an average of the two. So we see that merchandise trade has rebounded in the third quarter, but is still far below pre-COVID levels. I also think this figure leaves out two important considerations. First, it excludes service trade since we just don't have good data on trade and services right now. This is increasingly problematic as a growing percentage of trade occurs in services and will likely drive the new information economy globally as well as in Asia. Without these data, it is impossible to have a complete picture on how much COVID has disrupted trade flows or when we will reach a sustained recovery. The second issue is that the WTO only considers vaccine rollout delays, fiscal policy uncertainties, and weak labor markets in its analysis of downside risk. I think that there is likely much more risk around trade policy uncertainty, particularly if the vaccine rollout creates increased beliefs that trade competition is generating vaccine shortages in certain markets. But overall, the emerging picture is a massive decline in trade in the immediate aftermath of COVID and an initial modest recovery, with Asia faring better than the rest of the world. Next slide, please. These aggregate data are useful in detecting broad market trends, but are less helpful in understanding how COVID will likely have a more lasting impact on patterns of trade and investment. Don't worry if you can't see everything on this screen. I know that it is probably quite small because in this format, they are quite detailed graphs. I'm going to explain kind of the basic points that I'd like you to take away from these particular figures, but also these figures come from the McKinsey Global Institute, and they have a report on COVID and global value chains that I really recommend reading, and it is available ungated online. The gist of these graphics is that COVID has had differential effects at the industry level, and that industries themselves face heterogeneous exposure to different types of adverse shocks. On the left, we see that industries vary tremendously in terms of how concentrated their production chains are across countries. Industries towards the origin have actually diversified their production across countries in the past 20 years. These include the aerospace, vehicle, petroleum, machinery, and pharmaceutical industries. The industries to the right have concentrated their production in a few key countries over this same time frame. And I'd venture to say that much of this concentration has occurred in the Asia Pacific, because these industries include the mobile and communication equipment sector, computers, textiles and apparel, and appliances. I think this figure also provides a useful reminder that supply chain diversification is in large part a function of countries' trade, industrial, and competition policies. Again, I don't have access to the underlying data to show you this right now, but we can imagine that a large driver of the diversification of production across countries over the past 20 years has likely been the People's Republic of China's economic policies, such as Made in China 2025. These types of policies have helped develop new domestic capacity in several of the industries that have diversified their place of production in recent years. So value chains vary across industry in how diversified or concentrated they are, and many of the most concentrated value chains are centered in the Asia Pacific. This helps explain why COVID trade disruptions happened so early on in the pandemic, and also why Asia trade can rebound more quickly despite continued problems in Europe and North America. As is the case with any crisis, there is a tendency to overlearn the lessons of current concerns without preparing for the likelihood that the next crisis will likely come from a different source, have different consequences, and require different commercial and governmental policy responses. The figure on the right illustrates why firms and governments alike will have to take value chain fragilities seriously, while also not focusing solely on preventing future pandemic-related disruptions. The graphic looks across 23 industries and attempts to quantify each industry's exposure to different types of crises, including pandemics, cyber attacks, geophysical events such as earthquakes or tsunamis, heat stress, flooding, and trade disputes. Darker colors indicate more exposure. What we see is that industries vary widely in their extent of exposure to these different sources of disruption. I think it is especially important to point out that all of the industries in the global innovation segment, that is critical and emerging technologies, and more generally industries with opportunities for productivity gains, are highly exposed to trade disputes as well as to cyber attacks. These insights suggest that value chains may be significantly restructured to reduce the chance of crisis-induced disruptions, and that firms operating in high-tech industries are going to have to be particularly attentive to redesigning supply chains around exposure to policy risks associated with trade and cybersecurity. McKinsey anticipates that as much as 25% of global value chains may reorient across borders in the medium term. This means that countries in the Asia Pacific that specialize in global innovations industries will need to pay special attention to these international economic policy issues in order to stay competitive. The politics of supply chain reorganization brings me to my next big point, and that is that the international politics of globalization will continue to be viewed through a national security lens. The driving organizational force around global economic governance over the past 30 years has been liberal capitalist triumphalism that markets work, that state-led development doesn't, that economic openness is a positive-sum proposition, and that global institutions should develop legal regimes that create a rules-based order in which binding international agreements about trade and investment rules should govern economic exchange. But obviously, this is not the world in which we live anymore. The global financial crisis dealt a major, though slow-moving blow to the idea that markets work. China's extraordinary growth story has reinvigorated arguments about the role of states in managing economic development and innovation. A struggling working class in advanced industrial economies has reopened unsettled debates about the winners and losers of trade. And a growing frustration with the inability of existing international economic institutions to effectively deal with unfair trade practices or to successfully deliver a comprehensive development round in the World Trade Organization have reduced confidence in a rules-based order. The Trump administration's insistence on unilateral maximum pressure campaigns in all international economic fora has actively undermined the governance system that the United States championed since World War II, a system that led to decades of widely shared growth and prosperity globally. So what happened? Well, first, the global trading system fundamentally transformed since China entered the WTO. Next slide, please. Oh, this is actually not my most recent slide, so I'm going to have you move around a little bit more. Can you do next slide? Next slide, please. And next slide. Here we are. Okay. So these figures illustrate how much global trade patterns have changed. On the left is a depiction of whether the US or China was the larger source of imported products for each country in 2000. We see that the US is dominant in goods supply chains throughout much of the world. But by 2019, this map looks completely reversed. Now, these figures look just at goods and not at services, where the US continues to dominate in many respects. But this monumental shift helps explain why many in the US, as well as in Western Europe, are fearful of a rising China and also frustrated that China's rise has occurred concurrent with its accession into the WTO, as there are many charges of unfair trade practices. It is essential to understand current global value chain networks as developing out of a particular moment in global economic governance in which global firms could count on a relatively stable rules-based system, in which governments mostly viewed trade as welfare improving and positive sum. In this context, it makes sense to create fragmented value chains centered around geographies that lend themselves to export platforms. This same regulatory context also made just-in-time supply chains logically feasible. But just as COVID-related supply chain disruptions have caused firms to rethink the wisdom of lean supply chains, COVID has also turned latent fragilities in complex value chains into realized disruptions. The heightened understanding of the downsides to economic interdependence in supply chains combines with the belief that has gained substantial traction in the West that globalization is dangerous. This has strengthened the ideological and political power of those who wish to reverse the processes of economic interdependence and to abandon a multilateral rules-based order. Importantly, this increased skepticism toward economic openness precedes COVID and the economic fallout from COVID will likely accelerate these protectionist trends. For example, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development recorded a marked increase in the number of restrictive regulations toward foreign investment back in 2018, when 34% of all new investment regulations were more restrictive. And I don't need to remind any of you of the escalated trade war between the US and China, the Brexit vote, the Trump administration's decision to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership, the administration's decision to use its veto power to render the WTO's dispute settlement mechanism functionally defunct, or the many instances of the US using national security exceptions to raise tariffs on a host of products from a range of trade partners. It is tempting to regard the recently signed RCEP as an example of the Asia Pacific working to preserve a rules-based order, even as the US has recently turned its back on the institutions and ideals it has championed since the end of World War II. However, I think such a sanguine interpretation miscalculates the degree to which the PRC continues to blend economic, political, and military power in ways that are quite concerning to anyone who cares about a free and open Asia Pacific. As a large and growing power with substantial territorial aspirations, including expanding its territorial waters, as well as building artificial islands to increase its capacity for forward military projection, the PRC has shown itself quite willing to use geoeconomic power sources to achieve its objectives and widen its sphere of influence. Economic treaties and other governance mechanisms that do not effectively balance these aspirations are likely to accelerate the PRC's ambitions because the party state has not shown itself willing to substantially open its own markets, even as it seeks to open other markets for its economic and political gain. In other words, at this particular moment, the biggest risk to sustained and shared economic growth globally, as well as in the Asia Pacific, is that the two largest economic powers may continue to undermine a multilateral rules-based order that will function to transform the cooperative and welfare-enhancing components of globalization into a zero-sum struggle for spheres of influence in a neo-imperial mold. Such a system would likely require countries to determine whether to participate in a US-led market or a Chinese-led market, but would make it challenging to fully participate in both. Cleaving the global economy into two economic blocks is obviously against the interests of middle powers, and would also substantially reduce technological innovation by reducing the ability of commercially oriented firms to recoup their research and development investments. And in turn, this would lead to increased concentration of economic, military, and political power because states with the fiscal capacity to make large investments in R&D, that is, the large countries, would then be the primary drivers of any innovation in such a system. The growing embrace of national security frames through which to understand economic exchange is a severe challenge to the future of a multilateral rules-based economic order. And it is my hope that a Biden administration will be able to correct many of the policies the Trump administration that I think are a mistake, and that this can help to restart economic cooperation globally as well as in the Asia Pacific. But I think that the task before the administration is politically fraught. And what we should aim for is not a return to the status quo ante, but instead an approach to global economic governance that restores a rules-based order while also addressing some of the very real concerns that contributed to declining enthusiasm for economic openness in the West. First, while national security frames for understanding economic exchange are too prominent right now, there do exist real reasons to limit some kinds of openness under certain circumstances in the interest of national security. In particular, it is perfectly reasonable for governments to prevent adversarial capital from owning or controlling critical infrastructure or certain kinds of critical technologies. narrowly scoped national security screening of investment, as well as export controls, are important guide rails in an open economic system, as long as they are used judiciously. But second, the rules are going to have greater social standards in order to generate domestic support in advanced industrial economies. Next slide, please. Oh, and next slide again. Thank you. The figure on the left plots real income growth per person across global income groups from 1980 to 2016. This figure updates and corrects the infamous elephant graph that many of you are probably familiar with that generated so much attention several years ago. What this graph shows is that all income groups experienced income growth over the time period, but those in the 50% to 90% income group, which is the upper portion of which also includes the working class in the US and Western Europe, benefited the least from this growth. The figure on the right shows the share of national income of the bottom 50% and top 1% in the US over the same time period. Here we see a stark concentration of the gains of economic exchange in the top 1% and a sustained decline in the relative fortunes of the working class. When people assume that a Biden administration will be able to quickly pivot back to a pro-free trade agenda, I show them these two figures. Even if we know that many of the true sources of rising income inequality in the West are from factors like automation, the information transformation, a decline in unions, and a less progressive tax code, the fact is that many people believe that trade has made them worse off. The Biden administration will have the huge task of changing how Americans think about trade in order to be able to pass new trade deals. Rejoining the CPTPP should be top of list, but it will not be easy and will require that trade partners make strong commitments to ensure that workers in the US will not be displaced by these trade agreements. It also will require that the US frame this very specifically in terms of rebalancing to Asia and reconnecting with our partners in the area. Reinvigorating multilateral institutions like the WTO will also require demonstrating that these fora have the capacity of making sure that all countries are playing on equal footing. It is my great hope that our global economic governance system can be built back stronger on the basis of multilateral rules-based engagement that protects workers and the environment while also increasing global prosperity that is widely shared. As I hope I've shown over the last few minutes, this is a challenging task that will require sustained engagement among business leaders, civil society organizers, and governments to obtain. COVID-related trade disruptions have fed into a narrative that economic openness is dangerous and zero-sum. But a global economy fragmented into blocks and based on raw power rather than agreed upon rules will make us all worse off. I hope we will all work together to channel post-COVID trade reforms toward reinvigorating that rules-based multilateral system that has contributed so greatly to global growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Sarah Bartlett-Danzman, for your very insightful presentations. So you've touched upon the the global context of so to speak the impact of COVID-19 on global trade, and then you've spoken also about the geoeconomic power sources as well as your hope for Biden's administrations to correct some of Trump's positions. We'll go back to that a bit later on, but now I would like to invite Ibu Shinta Kamdani, who will, I believe, also be sharing her views on the current and future trends of global trade in light of the COVID-19. Ibu Shinta, the Zoom is yours.
Thank you, Pak Ian. So I think on our perspective as the business community, we notice a lot of emerging trends in global trade. I would like to present those trends in three big parts. If I don't mind, if you don't mind, please share my slides. I prepared some slides. So this is more from the business perspective. Is the slides ready? Okay. So the three parts, I divide this in three parts, namely the emerging trends in the global trade environments. And the second is trend in the global market demand transformation. And the last is the trends in global supply and value chain transformation. Next. So emerging trends in the global trade environment that Indonesian business notice includes first, the continuous slowing of global economic growth will be more persistent in the future. I think the slower pace of growth is not only because of the COVID economic recovery, which will take a while longer, and most global economic institutes also predict this, but also due to the uneven pace of economic normalization throughout the world. Now, it is also, if we see, contributed by the fact that this is also, COVID is also utilized by many countries, most notably we see from EU, to upgrade its sustainability commitment. So making sustainable and circular economic model a trend. This trend leads to less consumption of natural resources and non-sustainable merchandises like coal, oil, and etc. by the global industry, which also causes imminent constraint for growth in the trade of non-sustainable merchandise, and in turn contributes to economic growth constraint in non-sustainable commodity exporting countries like Middle East, OPEC countries, or Indonesia as a core exporting countries. Now, the US-China rivalry, I think, also create a trade tension, will be a persistent new normal in global trade, considering the bipartisan support of US policy against China. But it will have a new form, like was mentioned by Sarah also, under the Biden presidency. This will certainly contribute to uncertainty in global trade environment, but the volatility of uncertainty is expected to be lower compared to under Trump presidency. And the third is considering Biden's pledge to lead the creation of new role in the multilateral trading system. I think the existing WTO appellate body crisis and the complexity in WTO reform process, it is to be expected that the global trade players will greatly rely on more regional, bilateral, and plurilateral trade arrangement to seek a global trade certainty. Thus, it will also increase the importance of FTAs for businesses' decision to expand trade and investment. We also perceive the emergence of increased non-tariff measures and protectionism notion that are linked to a greater commitment in sustainability. It is apparent that more committed sustainable policy like the EU Green Deal, for example, will almost certainly create new or stricter entry measures on many products, from automotive due to stricter emission standard to wood-based and agriculture products due to concern of utilization of deforestation, overfishing, conservation of peatland, and many others. The next emerging trend is increased cross-border services trade, such as telehealth, online schooling. I think the exponential growth of remote working also may trigger a future booming in the cross-border supply of services, especially in the mode 1 of services trade. The emergence of such trend will also increase the needs to create cross-border arrangement to regulate e-commerce, digital taxation, cross-border data flows, which are very complex regime to form internationally. We also, lastly, expect increased role in the presence of SMEs in cross-border trade. This is not only because of e-commerce, but also because of the increased commitments from governments and commitments in FTA to facilitate international trade for SMEs. This will enable SME to directly jump in an exporter and importers instead of a domestic supply chain to the exporters and importers, thus increasing the SME's role and presence in the global trade. Next. The next one is the trend in trade will also follow what the market wants. And the market demand transformation also create emerging trends in the global trade. The main cause of the market demand transformation in trade is the growing dominance of millennials and Generation Z as global consumer whose completely different character of consumption affect the global trends. The emerging trend formed by market demand transformation will include the increased demand in affordability, also in easy accessibility to shop and trade, and fast delivery of goods. This will create new challenges in the trade production and logistic efficiency. Also, increased consumption of goods and services related to health, wellness, and experience such as traveling or dining in Instagram-able restaurants will affect the volume and type of goods and services to be traded across the globe. Increased global market attention to sustainability also increase global consumer care in the product of origins. This will drive increased measure in transparency and even traceability of product origins in the global trade. The clear example, of course, is the growing observance, for example, the IUU fishing policy in the trade of fisheries. A responsible consumption is often associated with less consumption of non-degradable materials like plastic, but it's also actually trigger transition to fast fashion, to sustainable fashion, which will completely change the global trade in the garment products. The campaign to consume local, to promote local economy in basically, this is nothing new, yeah, that we are campaigning consumer local to promote local economy. Now, I think the difference is that the fact is many countries has been adopting this consume local campaign in various ways. For example, America with buy American to made, and then we have also made India, China, even Indonesia have called the 100% Indonesian campaign. And this conflict has driven economies activities locally. It has increased the consumer care in the local economic empowerment and economic inclusivity. So there is a survey by KADIN International on consumer trend in Asia that found that pandemic create movement across Asian countries to support more local businesses, and that 42% of Asian consumers intend to continue supporting the local F&B brands in the future. So this emerging trend will certainly affect the competition landscape in the global trade. Last but not least, the global consumer demand companies to be socially and environmentally responsible beyond CSR. And this creates a trend in which demand on goods and services is swayed by MNC capability to create more socially and environmentally sensitive branding in the market. Next. Now, the third aspect is the emerging global trend will certainly cause reconfiguration of global supply and value chain. This affecting the include continuous China decoupling, which triggers investment diversion and supply chain diversification away from China. The fact that US-China tech dominance rivalry will create also a new pillar, new polar of technology of suppliers in the world that will reduce US technology dominance primarily if China can provide quality technology products at more affordable price to developing nations. Global supply chain reconfiguration will also greatly affect the transformation of objective in supply chain creations. So from simply pursuing of efficiency in the pre-COVID era to the interest of creating efficient, resilient, and stability in the global supply chain. Also, the experience of global supply chain disruption caused by China lockdown highlights the importance to diversify supply to include localized supply chain. This will create immense opportunities for local businesses all over the world to upgrade itself to meet global standard and integrate into the global supply and value chain. Also, the interest to create supply stability to market may also create an emerging trend in several industries to move its production bases from the most efficient location to maybe a less efficient location, just to be closer to its target market and to make it less vulnerable for trade disruptions. This will be an advantage for countries with huge markets such as Indonesia to attract global investment and making Indonesia as one of the global manufacturing bases. Now, last but not least, Indonesia business also see the trends which position ASEAN as the alternative global production base. And thanks to the combination of the factors like ASEAN regional economic stability, the needs of to diversify supply chain from China, increased regionalism through RCEP, and future trade agreements between China, Japan, and Korea will potentially, I think, position ASEAN as the manufacturing basis of the axis. So that's all for me, and I think Lili will perhaps go deeper on the RCEP side. I look forward to more discussion with all of you later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ibu Shinta, for your brief yet very deep presentations and insights on a number of aspects to be we should pay attention to on the global context. Now, I'm very much interested in your last point, right, where you said that the future might hold for ASEAN to emerge as an alternative global production base. And in that context, maybe I can refer to Ibu Lili, to share her views about, would you agree to what Ibu Shinta has just said? And what are the measures that ASEAN needs to deepen their, regional economic integrations in order to benefit from this shifting trends in global trade? Ibu Lili?
Thank you, Pa Ian. It's such a great pleasure to meet all of you. Though we are physically distancing, we are still very much socially connected. Indeed, we are just 20 centimeters away, so this really makes us feel much closer these days. Okay, as we know, COVID-19 has brought the worst economic impact, hitting the world both from demand and supply side simultaneously. By today, it has infected more than 1.1 million people in Southeast Asia with a mortality rate of 2.4%. It has caused more than 30 million people in Southeast Asia to become unemployed, pushing about 18 million people into poverty, of which 3 million are in extreme poverty. COVID-19 has affected the ASEAN economy from at least 3 channels. Lower global demand decreases ASEAN's exports, dry capital market reduces foreign direct investments into ASEAN's, and sluggish tourism sectors hits the services and many of small medium enterprises. When we are talking, I'm calculating in the best scenario, the 10 ASEAN economies will contract by 2.7% this year and will only grow by 3 to 4% next year. That's in the best scenario. Well, Indonesia recorded a slight pickup this quarter. It experienced a growth of minus 3.5% in the third quarter this year, compared to minus 5.3% in the second quarter. But this slight pickup should not make us complacent for three reasons. First, non-performing loans. Indonesia has non-performing loans that has been increasing, reaching the highest level since the global financial crisis. It increased from 2.6% in 2010 to 3.2% in September this year. Second, foreign direct investments has not gone anywhere. FDI recorded 20 billion in 2017, 20 billion in 2018, and 23 billion in 2019, and still very low in this year. So this is something that really need special attention from the governments. Last, it is true that Indonesia recorded a trade surplus of 13.5 billion US dollar between January and September this year. But we should take a note. This is very crucial that our trade surplus is mainly driven by a sharp decline in imports, not an increase in exports. Indonesia's imports declined by 18% just between January and September, while exports declined 5.8% over the same periods. What concerns us most is that the decline in imports of Indonesia is largely affected or largely contributed by a sharp decline in imports of machinery and parts, components, and raw materials. Okay, concerning these three indicators, non-performing loans, foreign direct investments, and trade surplus caused by a sharp decline in imports, I think the government should not do business as usual. We should not just wait and see, we should conduct massive transformations. First, on stimulus, I think it's very crucial to improve the disbursements of fiscal stimulus as well as monetary stimulus. Because if we fail to make good corrections this year and in the first semester of next year, the current unemployment can become a structural unemployment in the long run. And that's going to be a burden for Indonesia as we have a large demography contributed by large populations. So if they are become unemployed in the long run, then that will cause a fiscal burden for Indonesia in the long run. Second, on FDI, export and imports, I think this is the time that we need to improve streamlining export and import and investments procedures. We also need to optimize the use of FTAs and all preferential trade agreements. Just to give us an idea, in Japan, the use of FTAs are usually measured by the use of certificates of origins. It's about 83%, while in ASEAN countries, including Indonesia, it's only between 21 and 23%. So this is a huge homework for Indonesia to ensure that all FTAs and economic cooperations that we have been and is currently a member of to be able to optimize. Last, at national and regional level, I think we really need to work on streamlining non-tariff measures. This is again, for us, there's no use to have a framework of reduced tariffs, but at the same time, we still face numerous of non-tariff measures. To give us what's happening in the world and in the regions right now, the applied tariff rates in the 10 ASEAN countries declined from 9% in 2010 to 4.3% this year, But at the same time, the number of non-tariff measures increased from 1,635 measures to 9,502 measures over the same periods. So this is really something that we really need to focus on to be able for us to optimize the use of FTAs as well as other regional cooperations. So in conclusions, it is good to learn that Indonesia recorded a slight pickup this quarter, but I think we are still far from the normal businesses. And we really need to work on those three, on stimulus, optimize FTAs and PTAs, and to streamline non-tariff measures. Thank you, Pak Ian.
Thank you very much, Ibu Lili. And now, you know, the three panelists highlighted the importance of transformations, right? Ibu Shinta underlined market demand transformations. And then yourself, Ibu Lili, you just highlighted the crucial role of transformations in Indonesia's economic in order to address the three issues, the three challenges, mainly the foreign direct investment. The government recently has just passed, you know, the infamous omnibus law on job creation. Can I now turn to Ibu Shinta? Is this the kind of measures that the government is introducing in order to make the economy more transformed than before? Perhaps you can elaborate on that, Ibu Shinta?
Yes, thank you, Pak Ian. So I think clearly the structure reform that is done by Indonesia has been something that we are all, especially from this side, have been waiting for. We do believe that this is very, very crucial for Indonesia in order for us to be of the big economy as what we wanted. You know, we need to do this structure. It is really way, you know, overdue. So we were really we really appreciate the government, the fact that it's bold and dare to do such a reform with the omnibus. I think we see that, of course, in Indonesia, the challenges we all know as hyper regulation, so much licensing, so much overlapping between central and regional government, you know, all these issues regarding also manpower. We talk about, you know, ease of doing business in Indonesia. I mean, these are all issues that we all know. So we've been talking about it, right? But in order for the government to be able to have the solution in doing the structural reform, I think this is the only way to do it, through the omnibus, because they can't revise law one by one. It will take forever, right? So definitely for us, this is something that is needed, right? Now, as you know, the process of the omnibus has gone through an 8 months, quite a lengthy journey. Of course, throughout the process, there has been also many elements of public that are concerned and basically against it. But I think overall, we need to understand the need and the objective of this law. Indonesia, I think, needs to understand that we need to be able to create jobs. Our worry is with the demographic bonus that we have, if we don't do significant way of creating jobs, we will be in a demographic liability instead of a bonus. And this clearly, we clearly see, for example, the structure of the manpower in Indonesia. You know, we have 133 million people entering basically as a workforce. And from that number, actually, the what we call the informal sectors is about 55%. And of the 55% now, because of COVID, of course, the number also increased. But from the formal sector, we can also see that there are a lot of jobs that also so it's not full time, so it's like half time. And then we have also now, because of COVID, a lot of jobs that's being laid off, right? So we are very concerned with the need of the creation of job. Also with the automation and technology, this also impacted the kind of jobs and future skills needed. So we believe that this is really key for Indonesia. And in order to create jobs, we also need to drive investment, right? To come in investment. And investment is not just foreign direct investment, of course that's important, but we also need to create more investment locally. And this is from big businesses, even with our SMEs. So I think this whole background of why this omnibus is created is important for us to understand. And I think many people, when we talk about specifically on, for example, the manpower, right? Labor always feel like, there's not enough consultation and so forth. There's not enough transparency. But in actuality, we have gone through a tripartite discussion quite heavily with the labor unions. However, I have to say that not all what business want or what the labor wants, or by, maybe their inputs from other civil society, that are adopted or accepted by the government. And I think this is the problem, right? We cannot have a law that is satisfying everybody all. So there has to be give and take. And this is, I think, where the problems start arising. And also, I have to say, I feel, the development, that is being politicized also, and now it has to undergo some judicial review, of course, hinder the acceleration of the process of the implementation of the law. At the moment, Pak Ian, we are actually going through the government is preparing the implementing regulation. So there are about 40 PP and 4 PEPRES that President agree that are now currently being prepared. And we are now they're even putting all the draft available draft on the website, so everybody can they learn from their mistake in the past and be much more open and get inputs from everybody. So they are now very transparent and putting it on the website. So we are working closely with this because it's very important that, as you know, many good policies in Indonesia has weakness in terms of the implementation. So there's always a gap with this. So we have to ensure that this is not just about the law, but how the implementation on the ground is what we are expected. But overall, I think I have to say this is a bold move, and I think we really need this to increase our Indonesia competitiveness. We've been always talking about competitiveness, and this is the time. I mean, when foreign investor, they look at many countries in coming in to invest. So we need this competitiveness. Indonesia needs to improve its investment climate so that we can attract more investors.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ibu Shinta. So the government has applied, what I would say as an open mechanism to absorb ideas, right? Especially in drafting the implementing regulations of the omnibus law. So thank you very much, Ibu Shinta. And now I would like to open the floor for questions from the participants. I have now on my screen is from Richard Kartawijaya. This question goes to Ibu Lili. The Indonesian government did a lot of things on legal, political actions, and also lower down the interest rate. Do you think that Indonesia needs to do more? What kind of action would you expect in real things? Ibu Lili?
Thank you, Pa Ian. Thank you, Pa Richard, for very interesting questions. I totally agree with you. I really appreciate the bold and very responsive governments and administrations that we have right now, as well as some of leading ministers that have been working so hard managing very well fiscal stimulus. Let me highlight three things. On the stimulus, I think it's very crucial for us on the disbursements, as I mentioned, on the disbursements in this year and the first semester of next year. Because now we are facing issues of unemployed people. If they cannot come back to the normal, say if they, because like in the 3-5 years time, as Bu Shinta mentions, they're gonna become liability, because first they cannot come back to the normal job because they skills will be obsolete, and second they will be overcrowded by fresh graduates. So it's very crucial for us to think the disbursements of fiscal stimulus to ensure that social safety nets will go to the right beneficiaries and it work effectively on the right people that need it most. Second, on the streamlining export, import, and investments procedures, I'm taking a very simple examples on certificates of origins. So if you're a businesses, you want to use the FTA, it's not coming for free. You have to qualify on the certain qualifications. It can be regional value contents. It can be a wholly obtained. So there are certain specifications, product rule specifications. To be able to do so, you have to apply and ensure that your product is eligible to enjoy preferential tariff rates. Okay, this is something that we know only at the very specific businesses, but not so many businesses in Indonesia understands this issue. And second, to be able to get the certificates of origins, I think it should be able to have the post at many of regions. So now, even though it's very centralized, it's fine, but at least the systems can be done online and the system has to be there. Okay, that's just one example that's very simple that the government can do, but has not been done yet. Okay, and the last one is on the, you mentioned about interest rates. It is true, and interest rates, government through monetary policy, through monetary stimulus, the government has lower interest rates. But again, as for your information, Indonesia's businesses, only 6% of medium and large firms use banking and financial sectors as their sources, only 6%. So I think the key, again, I want to highlight on the fiscal stimulus to make sure that we can boost domestic markets. I mean, it's good on the monetary stimulus. I think it's good what the government has been doing. But again, on the monetary stimulus, for me, it's the implementations to ensure that the lower interest rate can be enjoyed by small and medium enterprises, not only the large firms. Thank you.
Thank you. Now we have another question from Maria Usman Kagda. Dear panelists, a very good morning. So the question goes, will the government consider lowering down the electricity bill for manufacturing sectors? Anyone would like to respond to this? Perhaps Ibu Shinta. The question is on the probability of the government to lower down the electricity rate for manufacturers.
Yes, I think you should ask the government that, because we've been asking. Actually, manufacturing sector, from the different sector in manufacturing, we have actually proposed to the government to lower its electricity costs. Honestly, they have not able to do that. But what they did was actually reducing the minimum payment. So as you know, in electricity for manufacturing, untuk industri, for industry itu kan ada the minimum that you have to pay even if you don't use it. So that was able to be, I think, waived but lowering the cost itself, I think it's still maybe I can touch a little bit about the economic recovery program that government is doing.
Please do.
Especially on the stimulus, because I think Lili has mentioned also on the stimulus.
Right.
You know, one thing for sure is during the COVID, I mean, we know how much it's impacted industries. Some sectors impacted more than others. If we talk about the hospitality, transportation, I mean, I think hotels will take quite some time before it can go back pre-pandemic. But so a lot of sectors are impacted, and of course, we are really very much hoping on this stimulus. And when we talk about stimulus, actually in the COVID, there are two sides, right? On the supply side and on the demand side, right? So on the supply side, throughout the COVID period, we have been seeking for, you know, more on like that, you know, electricity costs, labor costs, you know, all the trying to reduce the cost of doing this so that we can manage better in terms of the cash flow. Now, one of the big thing actually is also the restructuring of credit, and this is very, very important because restructuring for credit at this point for industries is key. And if you see, actually, the SMEs is very clear. So they most of the restructuring by SE based on the POJK 11 has been fulfilled, I think majority. But from the business, which is, we talk about business, yeah, it's we're talking about the one above 10 billion. So we're not talking also about just the big operation, but the one that has 10 billion over. Now, a lot of these businesses are still struggling in terms of getting restructuring from their bank, because this is all about individual banks giving restructuring. And the other thing that's more important actually now, even more important, is for the recovery, we need the new modal kerja, ya, jadi capital.
Working capital.
Yeah, working capital to of course to revive, and this is where we start now really pushing the government, because I know the government has mentioned it has given it's provide stimulus, you know, and we'll spend about 14 trillion for cooperation, for example, you know, for this working capital, with the guarantee from LPAEE for the export, you know, and the EXIM and PII. But unfortunately, this has not been able to be executed. Again, you know, there's so much, yeah, I mean, there's still discussion right now. I think because what happened is the banks are also I mean, they are also very careful, because in order for them to be able to give this I would say working capital, you know, they need to also there's a risk from their side, so they are looking at this as any other businesses that required loan facility, and this creates of course quite a lengthy process, and at the moment the urgency is very much there. So this is one thing, for example, that I want to share, that the stimulus, I mean, we appreciate all the fiscal stimulus that's given also on the tax incentive and so forth, but this is actually crucial for businesses to be able to continue with their business. The other thing that I want to mention is the demand stimulus, the stimulus for the demand. And this is also another key, because as we see now, where does the demand come from? Okay, there's some normalization already from overseas, especially in Japan, you know, China, you know, Korea. There's already some normalization, so exports start picking up, you know. But we can't, I mean, you know, we can't rely, of course, only on the overseas. That's very small. What is important is the domestic demand, and this is where the key is how we can government can increase the purchasing power. That's one thing, because of course the biggest is the domestic for household spending, right? And that needs to be increased. But we also see that government spending, and this is where the government is pushing now. We need the government spending because government can control that, whether that's spending from the regional government as well as spending from the central government, including the strategic projects that the government are doing. So this needs to be pushed because the demand needs to be created. So while we are starting to improve, and if you look at our PMI start to pick up and so forth, but at the end, we need this demand much faster. So this is where I think we need more stimulus on the demand side so that the business can start reviving and recovering the economy.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shinta. And one last question is coming from James Rayawan. So the question is, with the changing landscape of the market and how people interact in the society, what would you say the biggest opportunity that young entrepreneurs must capitalize in this point of time? Do you think that with this pandemic, it is actually a good thing to leveling the playing field between large corporations and small businesses? I'm going to throw this to all the three panelists who would like to address these questions first. Maybe
Professor Sarah can go first, Bu Shinta, and I'm going to go to last. Thanks.
All right, Sarah.
Well, thank you. So that's a big question. And I'd like to focus on the last part of it, which is, whether the pandemic can be a leveler. And I think that what we have seen in the past is that oftentimes we actually see the case that larger companies, when they have more resources to weather crises, that they can come out in stronger positions than can smaller firms that don't have as many resources at their disposal. And so much of that will depend on domestic policy responses in terms of how much support there is for small business to be able to get through a crisis. But I think the other part of that is that as we think about kind of changing supply chains, changing those value chains to be more resilient, there will be more opportunities to slot into value chains that maybe weren't there before, as corporations think more about having different redundancies and resiliency as opposed to single source. And so that might be an opportunity for growth for smaller businesses as well. But again, that's really going to depend a lot on domestic policy response and how much governments are going to put resources into investment facilitation, and in particular in helping smaller firms develop those trade relationships with the larger firms that tend to be at the top of orchestrating those sorts of supply chains.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. Ibu Shinta, would you like to address the questions?
Okay, I think we all clearly know that during COVID, our SMEs are very much impacted, very different than the previous crisis that Indonesia going through. And the government has been really, trying to support with more and more stimulus. But the importance to me, I think access to financing or the stimulus, how much can you actually give, right? I mean, there's this limitation when we talk about financing. I think the fundamental issue that needs support for our SMEs, I think it's very clear. We have always looked at not only the access to financing, but also the access to market, right? And when we talk about the access to market, it's also the readiness of our SMEs products. And this is not just for the international market, not for just export market. We even talk about the local market. So I think first and foremost, we need to really government to facilitate in terms of providing training skills for our SMEs, that their products are ready, and especially with the standard that that can go also to other markets in the world. And we have been working very closely with SMEs on this. And I really find that there needs to be a better ecosystem. I mean, the way I look at it right now, Pak Ian, it's like a lot of effort is done individually. You know, it's not a synergetic effort. So what happened is we are not maximizing, right? So government is doing their thing, private sector is working their thing, and then there's some maybe NGOs and so forth doing. So we
not synergized.
Yeah, we need to look like the whole ecosystem of the how can we support and help them, right? Because this is the momentum of COVID that actually SMEs is also transforming. As you know, many business does not survive. They have to change their business into other models, especially adapting to the technology. I mean, we know without the e-commerce, I think it's very difficult now for our SMEs to grow. So adaptation of technology is also a very big thing. Now, instead of looking at that SMEs can be the same level playing field, actually I look at more now, and we in KADIN is also working on more partnership between SME and the MNC and the big businesses, because the SME need to be part of the supply chain of the big businesses. That's how it can help also in growing and opportunities for many of the SMEs. So this is, I think, something that that we need to look at. How they're creating more cooperation and how they can be included. So this is what we are working on. We are also looking now into, of course, big into export, because while we are transforming many of our SMEs, we are also looking for potential export markets for our SME, and many got to do also with the economic of scales and costs, right? At the end of the day, this is why we can't compete with China, is because the economic of scales, of costs. And I also want to touch actually, not just for the SMEs, but also in general for the industrialization of Indonesia, because I think this is another important aspect. Indonesia has always been talking that they want to be part of the global supply chain, but are we ready? Is our industry ready? Because 70% of our materials are still imported, right? So unless we also expand our industry in also producing more of this, what's needed instead of just import, I think it's going to be very difficult for Indonesia to be able to produce products with the right economic of scale and the cost that can be competitive. So I think this overall is also some fundamental issues that Indonesia needs to address. And I think SMEs, of course, is a big part of it, but I think there is even more priority for Indonesia to also look at in the structure of the industry, not just increasing its value-added industry, but also looking into how we can have more less our dependency on import of the raw materials.
Thank you. Bu Lili?
Thank you, Pak James Rayawan. I think that's super interesting questions. The digitalizations these days, I call it crisis-driven accident transformations. So we want or not, we are pushed to be able to digitalize community, right? We should embrace the digitalizations community. And this is something I agree with you. I think this is something that provides opportunities for young entrepreneurs to be able to have level of playing field with big established companies. I learned that digitalizations companies with digitalizations process can earn about 23% profit only in the first semesters this year, compared to those who are not exposed to digitalization's process. So that's something that really pushed us to a very good transformations. But the thing is that I totally agree with Ibu Shinta. When we want to grow up, small medium enterprises are facing issues on accessing to finance and accessing to market. And one way to solve the issue is by being legal. And that's something that I think small medium enterprises should really learn on expansion of their products. And I again learned that currently there are at least 3 main industries that are growing recently. One is food and beverages. Second is health products, including textile and garments producing health-related products. And third is the online learning industry. So those are small and medium enterprises working on those 3 main areas have been showing progress in the current situations. But yeah, again, I agree that they're having more opportunities in this current situations, but for them to be able to grow and grow bigger, they should, or we or the government should really facilitate for them to be able to get easier access to finance and easier access to the market. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very interesting. And now, just now, Ibu Shinta touches upon the issues of the importance of adapting to technology and as well as partnership, right? I will go into the technology part after this, but I would like to highlight first the keyword partnership. Can I now go to Professor Sarah? So you talk about, one of your expectations, which I believe is the expectation of many as well. The Biden's and Kamala Harris administrations to make some adjustment in a correct way of Trump's policy. So in that context, what sort of insights can you give us on the projections of the Biden-Harris measures to improve trade relations with the U.S. partners, especially in Indonesia? Sarah.
Sure. Yes. Well, we're learning. We've been learning over the past couple of days kind of who Biden plans to appoint or nominate to major positions within his administration, and we're seeing that it's definitely the case that Biden is planning to nominate people who have very deep connections with diplomacy and who believe strongly in multilateral institutions. So Tony Blinken, for example, is going to be nominated very likely to be the Secretary of State, and he has a long history within the State Department and was the deputy under President Obama. And so we do know that that the Biden team is working to bring in many people who really believe strongly in multilateralism, in international institutions, and also have the diplomatic chops to be able to kind of hit the ground running, so to speak. The question is going to be, how does this sell politically, particularly given that in the US, there's very likely going to be divided government where the Senate will likely be controlled by the Republican Party. And even if it isn't, it will be a very closely held majority. And at the same time, there's just a lot of kind of domestic weight that is going to be, driving the Biden administration back from really engaging wholeheartedly in, developing new trade deals quickly. And that's because there continue to be a lot of economic concerns, particularly for the working and middle class in the United States, and a general sense that we should be fixing our own home first before moving outward. And so for those reasons, I anticipate that it's going to be challenging for the Biden administration to lead on trade. At the same time, when the Biden administration engages with partners, trade is going to be at the forefront of everyone's mind. And so partners will have to push the administration to elevate issues of trade to a higher level in the administration. And so I think that what we're going to see is over time an emphasis in particular on trying to re-engage, especially in the Asia Pacific or Indo-Pacific, depending on, in the US, we oftentimes talk about the region as the Indo-Pacific, as a way to kind of re-engage with a part of the world that is incredibly important for the US and one that has been neglected in recent years. So I guess what I'm saying is I think it's going to be hard for the Biden administration to kind of very quickly fix a lot of the issues that are going on or that have gone on under the Trump administration, and that they're going to need to be very politically astute about how to engage in trade negotiations that will be very that will garner a lot of attention, while also making it clear that the administration cares very much about domestic policy and about helping those who feel like they have not benefited very much from the global economy. So it'll be hard, but I'm hopeful.
Everyone is. Thank you very much, Shara. Now let's just go into the topic of digitalization and global trade. Ibu Shinta, you mentioned a couple of times about the importance of, or the likelihood for MSMEs to have an increased role in global trade. And just now you said that one of the key figures is for them to adapting to technology. But the reality is in the market, and as we all know, that business that have invested quite significantly in ICT are those who prevail, right, in this era of technology. So what do you think, what sort of interventions that the government should provide to help MSMEs to adapt to these new situations? Because I think the issue goes beyond adapting to technology or accessing to technology, but it's the availability of the infrastructure itself. Ibu Shinta.
Yeah, I think everybody these days talks about technology, and especially we talk about marketing through e-commerce. We know the success stories of many of our businesses like Tokopedia, Shopee. They're doing very, very well. I think I always look at this. Yeah, this pandemic actually is a wake-up call. Why is that it's a wake-up call? Because actually many of the issues that we are now addressing, we already knew before even the pandemic, right? The problem is it needs a crisis to wake us up and say, wow, now it's in front of us, right?
To stimulate.
Yes, yes, but basic things first, because I'm really now very much prioritizing on the human capital development. Why is that, right? Because we're talking about first and foremost education. I mean, let's not talk about the infrastructure yet. Talk about education, right? How much of our even future generation have this kind of access of education, for this technology and IT. So what I mean is we need to go back to basic, that the government need to address, that we need to come out now with the right people coming out of the education. What I mean is this: we all know there is a shift of jobs. We all know, right? Companies are even factories going automation. We talk about Industry 4.0. We talk about many other things. But are we ready with the right skills entering and that can be absorbed by the industry? This is our key problem. We don't have the right link and match, right? So how can now we scale this up immediately? So we need to see, we have to create government, and maybe government can't do it alone. Again, this is more like, government need to do it with the, with the business, with academy, university. We need to look at a really changed mindset and how to put and scale up availability of education, especially coming out more from the STEMs, right? So we talk about engineering, and we need more engineers. We don't have enough engineers in these countries. So that means there has to be a shift in our also curriculum. And I know that if we start from the very beginning, if we talk about our even, we have major even challenge in education in general, but let's talk about specifically on technology. Let's talk about specifically on IT. So there's also needs to be creation now, a fast track of like a boot camp online, that can provide skill to our even existing workers. So we're not even talking about the younger one, but we're talking about existing workers, so they can shift immediately. And this is what I think government needs to provide, because we need this to be accelerated, right? And the second, of course, infrastructure. I just work with some of the local government. They told me now, now Ibu, we are providing some Wi-Fi even in area for free. I think this is important, right? When we talk about even access to Wi-Fi, I mean, not everybody has this access, so we need to provide this for free so that our people can work using Wi-Fi. And in the infrastructure, so the infrastructure of in general, it needs to be addressed as well. And of course, we talk about investment. We talk about, this is not a small amount.
Yeah.
So the priority, I think, of the government needs to really look at IT as an enabler and put the right ecosystem in place so that we will, really be able to fast track the usage of also the technology itself. And I want to end by saying that technology is not just about IT, as you know. We talk about innovation, technology, many things. Even during COVID now, suddenly the government is paying attention of development of products related to COVID, testing and so forth. This is all technology. R&D Indonesia has not been paying much attention to R&D. Our allocation of budget of R&D is minuscule, right? So we need to look into this also in the future.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think, one of the most important point that should go hand in hand with adapting to technology is how we, especially the government, how the government should help the micro, small, and medium enterprises to accelerate in the global as well as regional value chain. And I think the recently signed RCEP served as an instrument for that. So in that regard, maybe Ibu Lili can touch upon a little bit on the RCEP. What sort of benefits of the RCEP for these medium, small, and enterprises for them to integrate further and deeper in the regional economy. Ibu Lili.
Thank you, Pak Ian. So to give you a highlight, the RCEP is the biggest regional trading bloc. The RCEP is 29% of the world populations, 30% of world's GDP, 20% of world's total trade, 29% of world's total FDI. So it's a huge market sources of capital.
Yeah.
For small and medium enterprises, what we are expecting from the RCEP is that first, through the trade facilitations and investments facilitations, I think like in the chapters of the RCEPs, it's really highlight the importance of trade facilitations and investments facilitations. This is something that can be used by small and medium enterprises. For example, when we want to export, we can have the minimum of the threshold of minimum, like we can share the containers with other small medium enterprises. And the second one is on the promotions as well as the investments procedures that can also be used by small and medium enterprises. But again, if I may highlight, coming back to the non-tariff measures, I think this is really a homework for the 15 country members. In the sense of ASEAN's, the non-tariff measures, just between the last 10 years, the non-tariff measures increased about 3 times, while in the +5 countries, the number of non-tariff measures increased more than 5 times. So this is something that we really need to work on. But if we reduce tariffs significantly, if the non-tariff measures are still there, particularly those can be barriers for trade. Not all non-tariff measures are bad. I mean, some of them even are very good to serve for health, safety, and environmental protections. But some of them can be barriers to trade. And this is really something that the regionals work together to streamline procedures. Because for large, medium firms, they can hire a lawyer to deal with all these procedures, right? But for small and medium enterprises, this is the roles of the governments to ensure that the RCEPs can be utilized at the optimal levels, particularly for small and medium enterprises to have the inclusive growth in the regions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ibu Lili. We have now come to the final part of the session. We've discussed quite extensively about the current and the future trends of global trade. But before we sum it up, and before I turn the Zoom back to Pak Shoaib, can I ask each of the panelists to deliver, a short remarks on what should emerging economies, including Indonesia, prepare to ensure that their engagement in global trade in the future is resilient? Can I have 30 seconds max from each panelist? Can I start with Sarah, and then Ibu Shinta, and then Ibu Lili?
Sure. So real quickly, none of this should come as a surprise for me. One is continue to work on restoring a rules-based order, the work that you have done on the RCEP, but also thinking about re-engaging not just regionally, but in a more kind of global way, as well as the US comes back on board, I think is going to be really important here. We don't want a world in which economic and security issues are too wrapped up together. The second is, I didn't get a chance to talk that much about digitalization and issues around infrastructure, but I think considering how choices over infrastructure build-outs will affect trade and investment possibilities in the future in a digital world is really important. And finally, moving up the value chain really requires an open investment environment and partners who are willing to share the benefits of that, of their technology in the places in which they are investing. So those are my kind of 3 quick 30-second points to make. Thank you all very much for a really engaging and interesting discussion. I've learned a lot from you all today.
Thank you. Bu Shinta?
Okay, for me, I think the basic things is competitiveness. Again, I want to highlight that word because while Indonesia wants to be part of the global supply chain, while there's now accessibility for Indonesia to be part of the global trade, it's coming back again to Indonesia's competitiveness in its products. And therefore, I think there's a lot of homework that Indonesia needs to do, and we have talked many of the discussion today. I also look at the second work as collaboration, and I think Indonesia needs to be part of this. I think part of the why RCEP is important for Indonesia. Maybe if you ask, is Indonesia ready? Maybe yes, maybe not. I think many people think we are not ready, but the key is we will be more. We are more at the losing end of the bargain if we not participate, because I think we need to be part of this agreement in order for us to be more competitive and attract more investment as well. So I think the two words coming from me as an end is conclusion is competitiveness and collaboration.
Thank you. Very sharp. Ibu Lili.
Thank you. I think COVID really teaches us that the government should not intervene too much to the markets. But if the market fails, that's where the roles of the government is. I think COVID really teach us that the government should ensure the basic needs for its people. That is electricity and water, educations and health. So if the government could provide those three sectors and not intervene too much to the markets, I think we can really come back to the real meaning of developments to help improving the quality of people, safe, healthy, and educated society. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone. Now, it's very unfortunate that we have to wrap up this very interesting discussion. I'm sure there are a lot of other questions that participants would like to address, but we are very much limited on the time. But I would like to once again thank to all the panelists, Ibu Shinta, Ibu Lili, and Professor Sarah Danzman for sharing their insights. And now I should pass the ball back to Pak Shoaib Kagda. Pak Shoaib.
Thank you, Ian, for moderating a very interesting panel, very seamlessly, I would say. You did a great job, but I think you were helped by the quality of the panelists and the deep insights that they provided. So I thank Professor Sarah, Dr. Lili, and of course, Ibu Shinta for your time and for, I think, providing both scope and breadth, but also depth in terms of the topic. I think trade is going to be critical for all nations going forward. I think the world is going through a period of some turmoil and some turbulence, but countries like Indonesia, I think, really are in a position to maximize the opportunities that will emerge going forward. And I think the government of Indonesia under Pak Jokowi and its ministers, and of course, Ian, you're very much part of the government, is very much engaged with the business community, as Ibu Shinta has pointed out. While domestic markets are important for most big countries, I think trade is still a big driver of growth. So thank you very much, everybody, on that point. Again, for sharing your time and your more importantly, your ideas and your thoughts with us. Sarah, thank you so much for staying up. I must be past midnight in Bloomington, Indiana. Must be getting cold, and you must be preparing for Thanksgiving, which is coming up. Happy Thanksgiving to you. And again, Dr. Lili and Ibu Shinta, thank you very much for your time. And of course, most importantly to Ian, Dr. Hadianto, for your effort and for your time in moderating this session. It's been a pleasure working with you, and I hope that we'll continue to engage with the government of Indonesia and with you personally going forward. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a good day. Stay well, stay healthy. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.